Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is vaccinate. Let's take a look at the definition of this word. The really only way you're going to hear the verb vaccinate used is to mean to treat with a vaccine to produce immunity against a disease. Now, it's always difficult when a word uses another form of that same word in the definition. So you're going to see the noun vaccine. It might be helpful to sort of think of this like a medicine. If you are a doctor or a scientist, you'll say, no, that's not exactly it. But to lay people, sort of thinking of it in that way can sort of help someone better understand this highly scientific word. So I hope you've been hearing lots of news and seeing this verb, vaccinate, and the context in which you're hearing it is in regards to COVID-19. There are different forms of vaccine, or again, kind of like we think of like medication that people are putting into their bodies in order to prevent them from catching COVID-19. And we'll look at some example sentences with that and talk about it a little more as we go along. You should know that vaccinate is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, you're going to drop the E and then add ing to form vaccinated. To form or make the past tense and participle forms of this verb, all you need to do is add D. And that's because this verb already ends in an E. The base verb, vaccinate, ends in a T sound. So our past tense ending is going to make an id sound. Vaccinated, vaccinated. You'll be happy to know that I don't have any additional phrasal verbs that alternate or change the meaning of this particular verb. And that's going to allow us to do a little more focused verb tense practice. And as I thought about the verb vaccinate, what I thought about is I generally hear it being used in the passive voice. So I thought today would be a good day for us to review the differences between active and passive voice. So in the majority of the videos I do, and as you listen to people speak on a daily basis, it's probably more common for you to hear sentences in the active voice. These sentences are beginning with the person or the thing that is responsible for the action. Let me give you two examples. Right? One would be, John washed the dishes. In this sentence, I know that John is responsible for the action of washing. In the second sentence, Susan cooked dinner. I know that Susan is responsible for the action of cooking. But sometimes in English, you're going to see sentences in the passive voice. They are going to begin with the person or the thing that is acted on. Sometimes you'll hear teachers say this, that receives the action, right? So in our first two examples, the dishes received the action of washing, dinner received the action of cooking. So in passive voice, you might notice that there is no mention of the person who did the action. It just might not be included. Or the person or people who are responsible for the action might come at the end of a sentence after the preposition by. So we're going to take the first two active voice sentences and make them passive. The dishes were washed, period. That could be a sentence. Or I could say, the dishes were washed by John. Similarly, I could say, dinner was cooked, or dinner was cooked by Susan. Now, when I teach this in in-person classes, I have many students ask, why do we have these different forms? It just makes things more complex. And you're right, it does. There are some different structures to remember with these. But what you're going to notice is that many people will use passive voice when we don't know which person or which people are responsible for doing the action, right? They're just unknown. In other instances, it just might not be important exactly who is doing the action. Another reason passive voice gets used is that the writer or the speaker really wants emphasis or their reader or listener's attention to go to the object or the person or thing that's acted on. A fourth reason some people might use the passive voice is if they don't want to assign blame, right? The classic example is mistakes were made. Right? We're not blaming and saying who made the mistakes. We're just acknowledging that mistakes were made. So today we're going to look at vaccinate in the simple past active voice and the simple past passive voice. And I think if you've been conversing with people here or in the US or around the world, you're probably more likely to hear this verb in the passive voice. So let's start by comparing affirmative sentences. So the two examples I'm going to give you have the exact same meaning. Let's look at active voice. Right? I could say, a nurse vaccinated me last week. This is a true statement, and one reason I've been saving this verb because I wanted to be able to speak from experience. So we know here a nurse was responsible for giving me a vaccine. The second sentence, though, and the one I have used as I have texted friends, talked to my family, right, is to say, I was vaccinated last week, right? So in this passive voice, you don't know who gave me the shot. And again, it might not really matter. I was just so excited to actually get it. So here are the things we should pay attention to. In the active voice, we have our subject and just the past tense form of the verb. In the passive voice, we use a past form of be, so that's going to be was or were, depending on what my subject is, and then we use the participle form of the verb. Here, past tense and participle are the same thing because it's a regular verb. Now, let's look at making a negative sentence, right? We could say, doctors didn't vaccinate them in January. Again, now we know who is responsible for administering or giving the vaccine to a group of people. In the passive voice, we would say they weren't vaccinated in January. So here, let's look again at kind of the different structure for this. In the active voice, we're using did not and then the base verb. So no ed here. In the passive voice, again, we're using a past form of be, then not, and then the participle form of the verb. Now, let's take a look at a yes or no question. In the simple past tense active voice, we might say, did the pharmacist vaccinate you last month? Okay, so again, we know who is responsible for the action. But more commonly, as people have checked in and inquired with you, you might have heard someone say, were you vaccinated last week, last month, etc. So here, again, looking at the structure, in the active voice, we started with did, then we had our subject, then the base verb. But in the passive voice, we started with a past form of be that matched our subject, so were you, and then we used the participle form of the verb. Now, let's spend just a couple minutes looking at words that are related to our verb vaccinate. And the first noun is something I've already mentioned. It's the word vaccine. It's a noun, and it refers to the substance. Or again, if we kind of think, in this case, it's a liquid. If you've had yours, you've probably seen your nurse or pharmacist using a syringe and needle to pull some out of a little vial. So the substance is used to make one's body produce antibodies that will lead to immunity against either one or several diseases. we have a number of different vaccinations, and it's very common for babies, small children, all the way into our adulthood to receive these substances in order to prevent us from later catching a very serious disease or illness. Here's an example of this noun in a sentence. Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson have created COVID-19 vaccines. There are other companies around the world who are also in the process of creating or have created these substances. I've chosen to highlight these three because they are approved for use here in the United States. The last word we're going to look at today is the noun vaccination. This is a treatment with a vaccine to produce immunity against a particular disease. So I've even heard a few people who grew up speaking English say, I don't know when to say vaccine versus vaccination. So again, if you kind of think of the little vial where that substance or liquid is in, right, that's the vaccine. And once it's been put into your shoulder, at that point, it becomes a vaccination, right? So that the process of administering that treatment or substance and introducing it into your body. Here's an example of this noun in a sentence. My parents have received both of their COVID-19 vaccinations. You probably know or have heard a lot that Pfizer and Moderna require 2 shots or 2 vaccinations in order to produce this high level of immunity or this prevention of catching COVID-19, whereas Johnson & Johnson just requires 1 vaccination. I hope you are in the process of getting your vaccinations, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for watching.